Welcome back to our new season of the Tip of the Week, and today I'm going to talk about frameworks. I'm going to talk about frameworks in a general manner, not in a specific language, about what frameworks are, the advantages and disadvantages, and what I feel is one of the biggest issues for beginners when they start learning and hear about frameworks. Let's start with what is a framework. A framework is basically a code library in a certain language that you're gonna download and attach to your project so that you can already use this library of functionalities, functions, classes, objects that were created by a team to make coding easier, so that you already have stuff that's already been done by someone else and you don't have to code that again. So for instance, I'm gonna show you here. I've got this, I downloaded here, Bootstrap and Codeigniter. Bootstrap is a CSS and JavaScript framework. Codeigniter is a PHP framework. Just to show you as example. So I have here Bootstrap. And for instance, I have here my Bootstrap open, and you see Bootstrap already has several CSS already applied, several classes that all you have to do is apply this class to your HTML so that you can already get maybe a responsive hamburger menu. You can already have a grid system. You can already have formatting for your forms, formatting for this and that, maybe validation, JavaScript validation, and things like that, without having to code that from the beginning. The same here with Codeigniter, okay? You have here, so I have here the Codeigniter app, and you have here the config, and you see I already have a lot of stuff. I have classes that deal with databases. I have classes that will deal with login and security and safety, and classes that will deal with connecting to my database and sending stuff to my database or processing a form and stuff like that. And that's gonna make my life a lot easier, especially if I'm a programmer who's working alone, and especially on safety, because you'll learn that on safety you never want to be alone creating the safety of your application, because you'll let loopholes pass that you won't see because you're working alone. You need other people to check your code to be able to test your code and say, oh, there's a loophole here, there's a loophole there. And the security of a framework like Laravel, like Codeigniter and stuff like that, is created by a whole team. So that makes that a better security, safer than something someone is going to create alone. So those are the main advantages. You're gonna save time in programming, okay? Because you won't have to reinvent. You're already gonna use functionalities that other people created. And frameworks are in several languages. You have Angular, Vue, jQuery for JavaScript. You have Laravel, Codeigniter, Symfony, Zen, and many others for PHP. You have Bootstrap and Foundation for CSS and stuff like that, and so on for many languages. So that's the biggest advantage of a framework, is you don't have to reinvent the wheel, redoing something that's already been done. You can use code that other people already created. You cut programming time when you use a framework to help you with your coding. If you're working alone, safety. What are the disadvantages of using a framework? Well, one of the biggest disadvantages is bloating. Because while some frameworks will allow you, for instance, Bootstrap and Foundation allow you to download a more personalized code where you download only the functionalities, the features you want, right? Without having to download all the code you don't want. That also poses a problem that I'm going to talk about in a second. So what does bloating mean? Bloating is the following. When I use a framework has has envisioned many possibilities of the ways you want to use the framework, many features you may need, and they try to envision the features everyone may need. But just because they envisioned all the possibilities doesn't mean you need to use all the possibilities. Maybe your project only needs a few of those features. So you're going to have a bunch of code that's basically there for nothing. And you're going to be storing this in your server. Okay, if you're talking about a server-side language, that's the biggest problem because you're going to be storing your server. If you're talking about a client-side language, on top of storing in your server, you're also downloading that for the client. So there's storage and download time. Like I said, some client-side frameworks like Bootstrap Foundation, jQuery, I think also allows, and others allow you to go and say, no, I only want these features, so give me the code just for those features. And then you have a smaller code. Problem is, when you use that, you can't use a CDN. You're going to have to provide the code for your client to download. Using a CDN gives you an advantage because a CDN is a repository, a public repository where that code is stored. And let's say my client went on Facebook and they go on my website. Their computer is going to see, oh, you already have this file downloaded from this CDN when they try to link to the file I'm linking on my website. So I don't have to download that again. And once again, you saved a little bit of time on download time. You can't use that advantage if you're using a personalized code, if you customized your Bootstrap and stuff like that. So again, everything has advantages and disadvantages, and you always have to see what you need for your code, what's best for your project. So that's bloating is one of the disadvantages. Another disadvantage, and this is going to sound contradictory to what I just said, is actually safety. And you remember that I said that if you're working alone, if you're programming alone, the safety created by a framework is going to be better than yours, right? Because of that you're working alone. Yes, but if you're working on a team, then your safety may be better because you're working a personalized safety for your application. So there's one website that uses those safety measures. Whereas if you use the framework, thousands of other websites are using that same framework, that same safety. So for a hacker, when they go, oh, let's see who I'm going to attack, whose safety I'm going to try to break. So for a hacker, breaking Laravel safety or Codeigniter safety or WordPress safety, that's not a framework, that's a CMS, but uses the same principle, is more productive than breaking Adriana safety. Because if they break Laravel safety, then they have access to thousands of websites. Whereas if they break Adriana safety, they have access only to Adriana's website. So, and information. So you see, that's a safety concern. But like I said, you need to weigh every option, weigh the pros and the cons of each framework, of each language, of each possibility to see what's better for my project. For instance, maybe I have a super simple project that using a framework isn't really gonna cut much in my programming time, but it's gonna make my website heavier and therefore slower to download. So yeah, if I'm not getting such advantage in the programming time, why am I gonna give up that download time with my user? On the other hand, I may have a super complex project that I'm working on alone that the framework is going to help me, and maybe I have a short deadline and the framework is going to allow me to meet that deadline. And really the download time that I'm going to lose for my user is very little. So then that's useful. So is using the right tool for the right time and thinking, I'm not going to go and kill an ant with a nuclear missile, okay? But I'm not going to go and use bug spray to stop an asteroid. I'm going to use the right tool. I'm going to use the bug spray for the ant and the missile for the asteroid, right? And stuff like that. And that brings me to the biggest concern I have when I see this framework discussion for beginners. There are two things for beginners that they say. First of all, you see a big discussion treating frameworks and languages as if they were religion. They're not, okay? And limiting yourself to one framework or language is limiting yourself. I'm going to come back to that as soon as I give you my other concern. One, and that's my biggest concern, is that I see a lot of advertising about frameworks and about framework courses that say, oh, come here and you'll have a website in 2 seconds without having to know JavaScript or PHP or CSS or any of the base languages. That's false advertising. If you want to be able to adapt frameworks to your necessities, if you want to be able to fix problems that happen with your application, if you want to be able to properly use, you want to be able to take the best advantage of the framework you're using, you need to understand the base language. You need to be proficient on the base language of that framework, whatever that language may be. Why is that? Because if you don't understand the language, all you're doing is copying some magic words the teacher told you to use to make this work. And if you want anything slightly different than what the teacher told you, you're completely incapable of doing that. Or if something goes wrong, you're completely incapable of fixing that. Whereas if you learn the language, then you understand, because like here, okay, this class here in PHP that deals with the database is a PHP class. If I understand PHP, I can come here and I can see the class and understand what the class is requesting, what the class needs, so that I can provide this for the class. And that is very important, because I've seen this explanation for classes in PHP, for instance, which is a class is an encapsulation that I can use in an object, and so long as I know what I'm getting returned and stuff like that, I don't need to know the details of how the class works. And the person used an example of a car. I can drive the car without understanding how the motor works. Well, that is, yeah, true. I can apply the class without needing to know every detail of the class. If I don't understand how the class works, if I can't go there and study the class and understand how the class works, and if I have to, if I need to because something is going wrong, then I can't fix the problem. And the problem is the programmer here in this analogy. The program isn't the driver, okay, in the car analogy. My user is going to be the driver. The person clicking on my website is going to be the driver. But the programmer is the mechanic. Okay, and my boss isn't gonna want to know that I don't know how to fix the application because I never learned PHP. All I learned to use was Codeigniter. My boss is gonna say, fix that. Okay, and you're not gonna be able to do that if you don't understand the language. So a recommendation, a suggestion I give to everyone who's beginning is learn the base languages. First, learn to do what the frameworks do by yourself. Okay, even create a framework if you want to. Learn to make that interactive menu, learn to make that login security, learn to connect to databases, learn to do that on your own, and then use frameworks to help you on your work after you've already learned. So think of this as when you were in school, that first you learn math, first you learn to add and subtract and divide and stuff like that, and then you learn to use a calculator to make your life easier. But you know what the calculator is doing. You know how that works. If something happens and you need to go and do the math by hand, you're capable of doing that. So that's my biggest suggestion for you in this video, for beginners. The second suggestion is don't limit yourself. Like I said, sometimes I see discussions both about languages, programming languages, and about frameworks, and people go and say, oh no, Laravel is the best and only framework you should be using, or Codeigniter is the best and only framework you should be using. PHP is so much better than Java, or Python is the best language ever. Forget about all the other languages. I think that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. This isn't religion. Yes, if you have a religion, you can't have like several religions. You believe in one religion, or if you have football team you root for, usually you only have one and you hate all the others. But this isn't that. And when you're doing that, you're limiting yourself. This reminds me of when I started reading fan fiction. I started reading fan fiction with Harry Potter. I loved Harry Potter. So I went to the forums and I went to read fan fiction. And I remember that there was a lot of fighting between the people who liked Lord of the Rings and who liked Harry Potter, and I never understood that, because there was like, if you like Harry Potter, you can't like Lord of the Rings, and vice versa. If you like Lord of the Rings, you can't like Harry Potter. And I said, why not? And there was a big discussion about Harry Potter being stealing from Lord of the Rings, which I imagine, yes, that probably happened considering J.K. Rowling wrote that afterwards and was probably influenced by the Lord of the Rings. But I mean, I had a total Star Wars vibe over there when I was reading Deathly Hallows, so I'm sure that influenced too. But why can't you like both? Why can't you enjoy both? And the same comes here. I believe that in programming, all the time you're making choices, all the time you're choosing, everything has pros and cons, and all the time you're choosing the best tool for your application, for what you need to do. So one language is going to be better in one situation and the other language is going to be better in another situation. The same goes for frameworks. One framework is going to be better in one situation and the other one is going to be better in the other situation, which also is an advantage of knowing well the base language. Because if you know well the base language, learning the frameworks is very easy because you're going to understand the logic the framework is using, and therefore knowing multiple frameworks and being able to go from one to the other depending on the situation you need is going to be even easier for you. So that's what I say about not limiting yourself. Don't limit yourself. Be an opportunist. I don't know if that's a word in English. That's a word in Portuguese. An opportunist is in Portuguese is someone who uses an opportunity. It has a bad connotation, but here in this situation, what I mean is take what's good from stuff and throw away what's bad, and don't limit yourself with an ideology. Programming isn't a place for ideology. It's a place for paradigms and that are always evolving, okay, always getting better, and therefore don't stuck yourself in one paradigm and reject all the others. Say, oh, here, yeah, that's better than this, so let's adapt this. But definitely not a place for ideologies, because if you stick yourself in an ideology, you're going to be limiting yourself, and you don't want to do that as a programmer. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed. I hope this clarified for those who are studying what a framework is and how a framework can help you and what you need to understand the framework. And if you like this, don't forget to subscribe and check out my courses, and see you next week.